Hey, this is Mike Rivers with the Rivers Group at Compass Real Estate here in my home office in Boston, Massachusetts. And I just wanted to get into the rental transaction process. I've recently been working with a lot of owners who own apartment buildings. And in doing so, I've run into a lot of renters that are really unclear about how the process works, have a lot of different questions. There are a lot of variables that can change how different rental transactions work. So this video is really meant to clarify how the process should work, how it sometimes works, and answer a couple of the frequently asked questions regarding the rental transaction process. So rental transactions can work differently in different states. And what I find myself running into time and time again as I'm talking to people from outside of Massachusetts is they're dealing with rentals that are done through a sales office or a leasing office in this large apartment complex that often has all kinds of amenities like gyms, fitness centers, pools, parks sometimes. And these buildings are often hundreds of units, and they're handled in a completely different way. There are still some of those buildings in the Boston area, around Massachusetts, that are still dealt with in that same way. But on top of that, there are a lot of 2-family, 3-family buildings that are owned by kind of mom and pop landlords that have maybe bought them 30, 40 years ago. Maybe they lived in there with their families. Maybe they still live in one of the units, but they were meant as kind of an investment. So they now lease out either 1 or 2 or all of the units to tenants, and it's up to them how they handle the rental transaction process, how they find tenants, how they lease out their units. And so now I'll get into the way that it's supposed to be handled in Massachusetts, and then beyond that, I'll get into sometimes how it's handled and how to make it a smooth transaction for you as a renter trying to get into one of these buildings. Rental transactions should technically operate with a licensed real estate agent representing each side of the transaction. So a licensed realtor representing the owner of the property or the landlord, also known as the listing agent, and then an agent representing the renter, also known as the renter agent. What does a listing agent do? So this agent represents the owner of the property, and it's really important for the renter to understand that they're not necessarily there keeping the renter's best interests in mind. They're there representing the owner. Their fiduciary responsibilities are to the owner of the property. Generally, they do want to create a smooth transactions for both sides, but at the end of the day, they represent the owner, and it's important for the renter to know that, and that's why they'll use a separate agent. But first, I'll get into what the listing agent does for the owner of the property. And a good listing agent will generate as much property information as possible to share online and with the open market, research and help establish a fair market rental rate. They'll professionally photograph the property, list the property on the market, promote the property once it is listed, coordinate property tours for potential tenants with other realtors, provide insights, tour feedback, market data to the owner to get them a feel for what's happening and what people think about the rental rate, and other feedback about the property, possible improvements that they might be able to make. Also to collect information from the applicants, assist with the lease agreement and signatures, arrange deposits, and coordinate access for the new tenants. And those are all the responsibilities of a good listing agent. And these responsibilities can be assisted by the renter agent, and I'll get into their full responsibilities next. What does a renter agent do? So as a renter, this would be your agent who represents you in getting into properties and touring, but here are some of their main responsibilities. First, they're there to compile an application package, protect your personal information, locate potential properties that fit your criteria, verify the legitimacy of a listing because there are a lot of scams out there, gather additional information about the listings, set up tours of the properties with listing agents or owners, help navigate leases and addendums so the renter can better understand, assist with lease signing and access to the property. So these agents on each side of the transaction basically work together to streamline the process, make things easier for the owner of the property, make things easier for the potential tenants that are trying to get into a property, provide clarity throughout the process, and just make it easier for both sides to get a lease signed up and make both people happy at the end of the day. Who the broker fee is paid to depends on the owner, the agents involved in the transaction, and the market. So generally speaking, a listing agent who lists the property online can expect to be paid a fee equivalent to 1 month's rent. So whatever 1 month's rent is for that apartment, that agent can expect that as a fee for their time to do the diligence involved in the transaction. And if there is a renter agent involved in the transaction that helps out with the diligence on the renter's side, they can expect to get half of that fee. So that 1 month fee is the total amount due to the brokers. And if a renter agent is involved, they can expect to be given half of that. So it's essentially 1 month's rent split between two agents, and then they go their separate ways. Now, who actually pays these broker fees? Why am I on the hook for helping out the landlord pay their broker to photograph the property and put it online? Why is that my responsibility as the renter? And this comes down to basically the desirability of the apartment. Oftentimes, and generally speaking, this isn't always how it works, but in my experience, the more desirable an apartment is, the more demand there is for it. Generally, you can expect the tenant is going to be on the hook for the full 1 month broker fee. Whereas if a unit is maybe less desirable, it doesn't have laundry, it doesn't have parking, it might sit on the market a little bit longer. Sometimes the landlords in that case will be open to paying the broker fee or at least part of the fee out of their own pocket in order to increase the demand for that apartment and get more tenants in to see the place, tour the place, and possibly rent it out, because they know it may not be as desirable just with what it is as a unit versus some of the other units on the market. So they'll go ahead and pay that fee in order to increase the demand for that apartment. So that's where the variables come into who pays the broker's fee. It's not always on the renter, but oftentimes in a competitive market, it is the renter's obligation to fulfill that entire broker fee, half of which will go to the listing agent, which doesn't represent them at all, and the other half will go to their renter's agent, who is actually helping them get into properties, tour, and get their application package together. Do I really need a real estate agent to help me get an apartment, or can I just rent one directly from the owner? Is it all that necessary? It seems like a super simple process. I'm not buying or selling a home here. Why do I need a renter agent? And the short answer is you don't really necessarily need a real estate agent to help you on the renter side. It happens every day. People find apartments on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, Zillow, and they work directly with the owners of the property to tour the property, get a lease signed. Sometimes they meet them in person immediately and kind of exchange and build a rapport and rent an apartment, and it's very smooth sailing. What often happens outside of the smooth transactions in this scenario is there are a pretty insane amount of Zillow, Facebook Marketplace scammers out there who are actually posting fake properties in order to generate people's personal information. They'll ask them for their email addresses. From there, they'll ask them for additional personal information, and they'll go ahead and sell their data and take advantage of them in other ways. Sometimes they even request a deposit made via a digital transaction before the tenant even gets in to tour the property, which I've seen several times. My renters have sent me posts of new houses that just sold that are posted for rent on Zillow, even though, they're not actually there to be rented. They had their pictures ripped off from the listing and reposted as a rental, and then they'll make up a really inexpensive rental fee for the place that seems too good to be true in order to generate as many possible leads as they can to draw people's personal information that are, interested in actually renting the unit out. And this happens all the time. So that's one of the main reasons I would recommend using a renter agent, is just to verify these properties, to contact the owners or the agents listing them directly, and not put any of their personal information out into the ether to possibly get ripped off by a scammer. Why is there a new Zillow agent showing up every time I request a tour that says they represent me? And I see this all the time. People are clicking Zillow tours, they're requesting to get into a property, and they meet an agent on site, and that agent says, okay, I represent you. The listing agent represents the owner. And you're sitting there scratching your head thinking, how did I wind up with an agent? I didn't sign any contracts. Why is this person saying they represent me? This happens all the time. To me, it comes off as a little bit disingenuous, but what happens is this. As a real estate agent, I can pay Zillow either before or after or a similar website in order to appear for people that are searching for apartments. So I live in Dorchester. If I want to find renters that are looking for apartments in the Dorchester area, I can go in and pay Zillow a certain monthly fee or I can pay, Redfin or one of these other websites in order to generate renters for me that don't have necessarily any representation. Occasionally they do have representation and just aren't sure what they're doing with the online searches. So what happens is after I pay Zillow, my name will populate as a local agent in the Dorchester area, and the renters that are clicking on "I want to tour this property" think that I'm representing the property, when in actuality I'm just paying Zillow, so my name appears in front of them on the websites. And since two agents can be involved in a real estate transaction, that 1 month fee that probably comes out of your pocket will go half to me and half to the listing agent that is actually listing the property on the website. So it can be very confusing. I've had people that are looking through Zillow and have toured 4 or 5 properties, and now they've spoken to 4 or 5 different agents who all say they represent them, when in effect, none of them represent them. They don't have a contract signed. Most often, at least in my experience with these renters, these agents haven't done a good job at explaining how they got there, why they're representing them, that they paid Zillow in order to get in front of them. So just be wary of when you're requesting tours on real estate websites like that aren't involved with a direct agent. Sometimes they're going to people that are paying for ad space on those websites. So just be wary of that. If you're not working with a real estate agent, you might be accidentally signing up for renters agents that you didn't know you were signing up for. In some cases, these agents who are paying for ad space are completely competent. They know exactly what they're doing. They might do a great job at explaining to you, hey, I paid for advertising space. I'm happy to represent you as your renter agent in touring other properties. And sometimes they will do a great job at explaining that. And if you do like this real estate agent, I would highly recommend, if you do see another property that you like, don't click on that tour request button on these websites. Just reach directly out to that agent who you want to work with and say, hey, is this property populating for you? Is this a legitimate listing? I would like to get in there to see it. Can you please check if it's still available? So that's how to handle like a Zillow or Redfin listing. If you are already working with a real estate agent that you like, or you may have met one of these agents through a site like Zillow, if you want to continue working with them, reach directly out to them. Do not click on these tour buttons, because you don't know who that request is going to. It could be going to an owner directly. It could be going to a listing agent. It could be going to another renter agent who's actually paying for ad space on the website. So that's how to handle tour requests if you're already working with a renter agent. I'm not getting any tour responses. How do I change that? How do I get a tour request answered? And this happens all the time. And probably what is happening is this person, either the owner or the listing agent, has listed the property. It's probably in a highly desirable area. They probably have had 200 inquiries come in the first few days or week that the place has been on the market, and all they're seeing on their end is so-and-so wants to tour the property. And in the meantime, they either are the owner and have a certain set of criteria they want to see from the tenant, like they want to have the household income be at a certain number. They want to have a 650 or higher credit score. They want to make sure they don't have any pets. They have to abide by certain fair housing regulations, but at the same time, they want to make sure they're not going to get scammed. There are plenty of great people out there, but there are also plenty of people who are taking advantage of unsuspecting landlords. They may have made a business out of moving into an apartment, not paying the rent, getting evicted, and then blanket applying to 200 other apartments, just to take a shot that one of these landlords isn't going to vet them as well as others might. So unfortunately, that is a situation that happens all the time, and landlords have to do everything they can from the get-go to make sure that the tenants are going to be a good fit for their property. And one of the ways they do that is by requesting for past landlord referrals. They want to make sure they have a good track record for renting in the past. They want to make sure their credit's okay, that they have a history of paying their debts and have done so. So these are some of the things that you can put out there up front in order to get tour requests answered. You can say, we're a young couple. We have a $100,000 total household income. We have 700 plus credit scores, and we can provide 2 great references from past landlords. So if you put all that information in there with that tour request, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a response versus a tour request that just comes in blank. There's no additional information. So what's happening is owners are just trying to kind of pre-qualify people that they can get in for a tour, because generally speaking, they don't have time to set up tours for 300 people in 10 days that have requested tours of the apartment. So the more information that you can provide without obviously putting yourself at risk, don't be putting your social security number in these little memos, but you want to provide them with some aspect, some perspective on who you are, who's going to be living there. If you have a good track record, you're making income that can get you into the apartment and go from there. You'll probably get a lot more tour requests answered providing that information. So you've toured several properties, you've applied to several properties, but you can't seem to get your foot in the door before other applicants. How do you solve that? And in my experience, what I do with my renters is try to have them generate an application package ahead of time before they're touring properties, so they have all of the general information already laid out and they're ready to go with an application as soon as they tour a property. They can just either have me send the application package immediately, or they can send it to me, having kept it on file. But generally speaking, as a real estate agent, I can't tell them exactly what they need to put together for each owner, but in my experience, many owners are requesting the same information, and all they want to know is that a person has the ability to pay their debts, has a history of paying their debts, has a good rental history, and can provide a good cosigner if necessary, which is very common with students who don't really have a credit history built up yet, or they're not employed full-time or at all. Having a cosigner sign a lease with you is important. So having a cosigner form filled out ahead of time is another way to get ahead of the game. So generally speaking, I'll have people put the following information together: an application for an apartment, which is basically personal information, who's going to be living there. Each person on the lease or who will be on the lease should fill one of these applications out, as well as providing a credit report that shows a credit score, credit history, that all the debts are getting paid, 2 to 3 recent pay stubs if you're employed, and showing what your pay is, what your salary, what your weekly or bi-weekly pay is, with your name, your company's name on it, so it's easy to verify. I'll have them put together 2 or 3 of those consistent pay stubs, and that way I can build it into the application package. And if you have a past landlord that you had a good relationship with, you paid the rent on time, there was no noise complaints, you had a good rapport, that's always something that goes a long way in getting an application accepted as well. So generally I'll have people fill out all of those things, send them back to me, or keep them on file. I generally recommend, people don't send all of this personal information to any agent unless they verify that they're an actual licensed real estate agent, or they are the actual owner of a property. So that's one way to get ahead of the game. A couple other things to keep in mind before you're signing a lease is, what payments are you going to have to pay at the lease signing? So what is the owner expecting for deposits, first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, broker's fee? Which of those are going to be coming out of your pocket, so you know what the total amount due at the lease signing is going to be. These aren't always necessarily you're just going to be paying 1 month at a time. Sometimes there are 3 or even 4 payments due up front. So you want to make sure you know what those payments are going to be. Also, you want to know what the rough utilities costs are going to be if you can. Sometimes utilities are included. Sometimes the apartment buildings aren't sub-metered in a way that they can separate the different units out. So the utilities might be included in that scenario, but oftentimes you'll be paying for your own heat, hot water, electricity, cooling costs. You want to have some idea of what those costs are going to be, because when you start involving those as well as cable and internet costs, you could be looking at another $200 or $300 a month in addition to the rental rate. So you just want to keep in mind what your total costs of living in this place are going to be. You also want to take a good look at the lease and any addendums that are added to the lease, so you know what to expect when you move into the apartment. Sometimes the responsibilities of taking the trash out every week or snow removal are with the tenant, so you might have more responsibilities than you did at your last building, or you might not be able to expect the landlord to snow blow the driveway, or move the snow out of the way so you can get your car in and out. Things like that. So you want to make sure you're on the same page with what the expectations of you are as the tenant, and also what to expect of the landlord when you move into the property, kind of whose responsibilities are where. So make sure you take a good look at the lease, the addendums, any additions to the lease. Sometimes they're unclear. Sometimes the lease doesn't have addendums on it. So make sure if you have questions like that, make sure you ask the landlord before you sign the lease. So you want to be on the same page, you want to have a good relationship with the landlord, and start with clarity from the get-go. Once you get an application accepted, you're then going to be signing a lease and any lease addendums. And from there, you want to make sure that you have your own signed copy that's signed by both you and the landlord for your own records. And beyond that, you can call the utilities companies, any utilities that aren't included, making sure you're calling the electric company, setting up the electric bill and making sure it's in your name. Same thing for the gas or oil company, or again, the electric company, depending on how the place is heated, and making sure you're not going to be without heat, especially if it's in the winter. And from there, you can coordinate access with the real estate agents or the owner to make sure you get the keys. From there, you're free to move in. If you do need anything beyond that, if you have any questions regarding the rental process in the greater Boston area, if you need help finding a rental or renting an apartment, feel free to reach out to me and my team. Our information is below. But hopefully this video gave you a better understanding of the rental transaction process and how it works in greater Boston and Massachusetts. Thanks for watching.